All right, today we're going to talk about the parts of the cell and what they do. Your job at the end of this video is to be able to talk about what each of the parts of the cell does. And then also, eventually, we're going to get into the differences between plant and animal cells. All right, so the job of the cell is to make proteins. This is the first bullet point on your note packet. So what the heck is a protein? There's lots of different types of proteins. Proteins make up receptors in our eyes. They make up muscles in our proteins in our muscle. They make up hormones like insulin and estrogen. They make up antibodies that fight off sicknesses. They help us transport stuff in our red blood cells. They help us make enzymes to help us digest our food. They help us store stuff. So proteins do lots of different things. We're not going to write this definition down, but proteins just make up a lot of different things in our bodies. They help us do a lot of different functions. So in order to make proteins, we're going to need the help of some cell parts, and we're going to compare making proteins to making cookies. So if I want to make cookies, what kinds of things might I need? Maybe some flour. Maybe some eggs, maybe some sugar, maybe some chocolate chips. Are there any other pieces of equipment I might need? Maybe a mixer, maybe an oven, maybe a bowl. All of those things are ingredients I would need to make cookies. And some of them are pieces of equipment. Some of them are ingredients. I also need somebody to make the cookies. If I don't have a person to make the cookies, they're not going to get made. So we're going to use this analogy of making cookies, and we're going to talk about cell parts. So when I talk about cell parts, another word for cell part is an organelle. And we're not going to write this down either, but an organelle is just a part of the cell. Okay. All right, first thing we're going to write down, DNA and chromosomes. So these have the information on how to make proteins. So DNA looks like this. When it's wound up all nice and neat, it forms an X shape, which is called a chromosome. We're going to say DNA and chromosomes are the same thing. I'm going to use those words interchangeably. Sometimes you'll also hear people talk about genes. Genes are little parts of the chromosome, so that you could use that as well. All right. So if we're talking about making cookies and DNA has the information or the instructions, which of these items is most similar to DNA or chromosomes? If you said recipe, you are correct, because recipes have the information or instructions, just like DNA has the information or instructions. So where's the DNA? The DNA is in the nucleus. The nucleus is this pink part of the cell here. It has the cell's DNA or chromosomes. We say it directs the cell's activities. The only reason we say that is just because it has all the information in there. So it contains the cell's DNA and chromosomes. So if you think about making cookies, where do we keep all of our recipes? Maybe it's an app on our phone. Maybe it's a recipe book. Maybe it's a little box of recipe cards. That would be like the nucleus. Eventually, we need to make the proteins. So ribosomes, sometimes they compare ribosomes kind of like factories, because factories make stuff. But ribosomes are going to make proteins. Ribosomes are the little polka dots everywhere here in the cell. They're little protein-making factories. So if ribosomes make proteins, they make the stuff, what's going to be most similar to the job of the ribosomes if we're talking about making cookies? The delivery truck, the trash, the chef, or the custodian? If you said chef, you are correct, because the chef is doing the making the cookies. Once the cookies are made, they have to get folded, or once the proteins are made, they have to get folded. So if you think about cookies, you've got a big bowl of dough. You've got to roll them into little balls, okay? Or maybe you made cutout cookies where you've got a cookie cutter and you got to stamp the right shape. Proteins are the same way. We fold them so they're the right shape. Imagine if things weren't the right shape. Imagine if I tried to eat my applesauce with a knife instead of a spoon. It wouldn't work as well. Or I tried to cut my steak with a fork instead of with my knife. Knives, forks, and spoons are all specific shapes so they can do the job that they need to do. And they're different shapes because of that. Our proteins, there's lots of different proteins in our body, and they're all different shapes because they have different jobs. Some of them move oxygen. Some of them hold iron. Some of them help us see. So they do different jobs. All right, once we have the proteins made and folded, we've got to package them. We're going to package them into these little things called vesicles. What the heck is a vesicle? I'll tell you in a second, but imagine packaging stuff up. So a vesicle, I'm going to show you an animation here. We'll see if it plays. Yep. So this little bubble is a vesicle. It's like a little bubble that breaks off and can carry stuff to different parts of the cell. That's a little vesicle. So it's a small little structure for transporting things. Part of the Golgi body or the ER that breaks off and then can travel around. You'll notice the ER, the endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi body, they look really similar. All right, cell membrane. This goes all the way around the cell. It's kind of like a fence, and it controls what goes in and out of the cell. Sometimes we call it the plasma membrane. So I wrote AKA plasma membrane. So cell membrane or plasma membrane controls what goes in and out of the cell. So it's all the way around the outside of the cell. So what would be most similar to the job of the cell membrane then, if it lets things in and out? If you said the door, you'd be correct because doors let things in and out. All right. Cytoplasm. So inside of the cell, we have this like water-like, jelly-like stuff that kind of holds all the organelles in place. This is called cytoplasm. It's mostly water, and it fills all the empty spaces. If we think about making cookies in a kitchen, the cytoplasm fills the empty spaces. What would be most like the cytoplasm here? If you said air, yeah, the air fills up all the spaces in the kitchen. Absolutely. Now, we need to be able to make energy. Okay, so the cell has the mitochondria, mighty mitochondria. A lot of you know the mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell. Well, what does it mean to make power? It means to make energy. If you've ever eaten a lot of Halloween candy, you know that eating a lot of sugar gives you energy. So the mitochondria look like these little squiggly footballs, and they're making energy for the cell. So if we go back to our cookie and we're cooking in the kitchen, mitochondria makes energy. So what would be most similar? I would say a power plant. Power plant's going to make energy. All right, the last thing we have to do is take a look at animals and plant cells. Animals and plant cells have a lot of similar things. How are they similar here in this picture? Oh, they both have a nucleus. They've got cytoplasm, cell membrane, mitochondria. How are they different? Well, you can see the plant cell has some extra parts like a cell wall, chloroplast, and a really big vacuole. So we're going to talk about those different parts now. So the cell wall goes around the outside of the cell membrane, and it gives structure and support to plant cells. Let's think about why plant cells might need structure and support. Well, animals. A lot of animals have skeletons and bones. Do plants have skeletons and bones? No. How are plants going to hold themselves upright? Well, they need a stronger cell so that they can hold themselves upright. So the cell wall kind of, in a little bit of a way, makes them kind of like they have a little skeleton, even though it's not a skeleton. All right, the chloroplast, responsible for making all the green, our plant's green, turns energy from the sun into sugar. So it does photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes sunlight, takes carbon dioxide, and makes sugar and oxygen. But basically, it's making food for the plant using sunlight. The last one we have is a vacuole. And the difference between plant and animal cells is that plant cells have a really big vacuole. Animal cells a lot of times still have a vacuole, but it's a lot smaller. A vacuole can store water and other materials for the cell.